Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. It's okay, so it's a black and white shot. Unbelievably realistic. I mean, the photograph, the lighting is really, it's black and white. It's a delicious black and white where you kind of really see some gorgeous tone and texture. It looks like, at first I thought it was a bobblehead, but then I
Oh,
realized,
okay.
no, it's a proper kind of sculpture of like Frankenstein, the sort of the 1950s, I'm assuming, I may have be completely wrong, but cinematic Frankenstein, quite faithful to a proper, I mean, it looks quite realistic.
Yeah.
Even the sort of the jacket. Why would Frankenstein be wearing a sports jacket that's kind of buttoned up? But it looks quite real and so first of all, how large is the sculpture?
I would say it's like life size, like a bust. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so do tell.
So one of my first horror movies that I was introduced to was Frankenstein.
Yep.
And then as we were researching, well, we wrote about it in our first book, but as we were researching for our second book, which is The Science of Women in Horror, we were exploring
Oh
just the
wow.
genre of horror and how women have been involved. And
Yeah.
what we discovered is that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, she was 19 years old when she wrote that.
Yep.
And she basically invented the modern horror genre. And so
Mm-hmm.
the cover of our book is actually The Bride of Frankenstein, which
Okay.
I just love. I love that classic monster movie
Oh
look.
right.
And
With the hair and the makeup and
yes,
yeah.
and that book, the Science of Women in Horror, we were actually nominated for a Bram Stoker Award for Superior
Oh.
Achievement in Nonfiction when it
Oh
came out in
wow.
2020. So we're very proud, and we really just poured our hearts and souls into that book, and we got to interview so many amazing women,
Oh wow.
and just to see how women have been involved in horror the entire time, even though maybe there's a misconception, or there was that horror's just for the boys, or if you're a girl you can't
Right.
possibly like horror movies.
Right. Well, okay. Here we have this dive that are all of your books co-authored?
Yes. Yep.
So,
All of the science series is co-authored with and it's with my best friend, and her name is Meg Hafdahl.
okay. Props to Meg. Props to Meg.
Yes.
Uh, I have some experience in putting books together. And so in terms of these joint collaborations, like how long would you take to put together the manuscript?
Yeah, we write fairly fast, and so we've been writing one book every 6 months.
Oh, wow.
Because our first book came out in 2019. We had two books come out in 2020. One just came out this fall, and one's coming out next fall. And like I said, we're working on our sixth one right now. So
Amazing.
yeah, it's been a wonderful process, and we didn't know we had written plays together before,
Okay.
and that's such a different process than writing nonfiction together. But it's been wonderful, and it works out well, and we've been best friends for almost 22 years now.
Oh,
So it's it's awesome that to get to do something you love with your best friend.
yeah. Well, and clearly you both have a groove because it is production and it
Yeah.
is about putting, and just kind of, it's not, I don't want to use the phrase churning it out, but it is the process of constructing these things. And of course, the more you do it together, the more you kind of fall into the rhythm, I guess.
Yes.
So why don't you talk about what is the typical writing day, if there is such a thing, for you guys?
Yeah. So when we started off with our first book, we very clearly wanted to make sure that we each had a hand in every chapter. And so we were writing every chapter together, step by step, saying, I'm going to research this, you research that, and we're going to come together and
Oh,
put it
wow.
together.
Okay.
As we got used to the process, even through that first book, we realized, okay, we have such a similar voice. And as we go through and edit it together, we can always change things up. But then we
Yeah.
started splitting up the work and splitting up chapters, And we found that it was even faster, of course,
Yeah.
that way if we just come together after it's written. And so we split up chapters based on, I feel really passionate about this movie, I want to write about it, or hey, I know somebody that we can interview, so I'll take the lead on this chapter. And it's worked out really well. And yeah, I don't know how other collaborators work, if it's more like pulling teeth, but we've been very happy and successful with how we do it.
Well, I think what it is like, I don't know if I guess for some people it would be a kind of, it depends on the egos, right? And
Yeah, that's true.
it sounds to me that you're friends first, and you're like truly collaborating, and you've figured out that you can actually have a really good rhythm together. So can you name a time or a moment where you both discovered something truly surprising, where you kind of looked at each other and said, okay, this is big, this is new, this is really unexpected?
I was just thinking it's very random, but we were writing about this movie called The Babadook. And this isn't really a spoiler because it happens right away in the beginning of the movie. The character, the woman's husband, dies in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
And we write about the themes of, the movie and what happens in it. But at that moment, we were researching also, it ties into what we were talking about. Madame Curie and her husband died in a
Yeah,
carriage accident.
yeah.
And it was like, wait a minute, why this is paralleling exactly what we're talking about. And they don't mention that at all in the movie, but
Oh,
just through research, it was like a lightning bolt.
yeah.
It's like, wow, everything is related.
Well, it's amazing how some themes do cycle, but do you think they're related only because you're making the connections post hoc, like after the fact, saying, "Oh, well, I can connect this to that." Like, for example, right now, upon reflection, because as we're speaking, I'm looking at this bust, right? So, how large is this bust? You said it's roughly life size.
Yeah.
Where does it live?
I'm not exactly sure. I assume it's a museum of some type, but
Okay.
yeah, everything I just I've got a framed copy of that,
Mm-hmm.
just to look at and inspire me.
Right. So there's this interesting thing about having this notion of traditional barriers to either by I don't know, your sex or gender. Like, oh, horror isn't really a female thing. Well, says who? Like, why not? And in the
Right.
same way that that physics wasn't or radiology wasn't a female thing, and you happen to cite Marie Curie, so it's like, okay, there's an interesting parallel there as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we really talk a lot about the not only the women who were pioneers in the horror genre, but also in the sciences, and we make sure to interview, female identifying creatives and scientists, just to, uplift those voices and make people realize these aren't, exclusively, male dominated fields, or maybe
Hmm.
they previously have been, but it's definitely, the tide is shifting.
Right. Okay. Do you also teach? You sound like
I
you
do.
teach.
I do.
Okay.
I teach communication at Lake Superior College. It's part of the Minnesota State University system.
Okay. So would you, for example, looking at your at students today and trying to compare them to what, say, your class was like when you were in the class, how have perceptions, or how have assumptions, or how have the biases shifted?
Yeah, I feel like, well, as I mentioned, I was especially shy, but I feel like the female identifying students speak up more than maybe we did in my generation when I graduated, and feel like they have a voice in the classroom, or when they're writing their essays or papers, or discussing points. I feel like that has shifted, and maybe that's my own singular sort of experience, but I feel like that's one major thing. And then also just, like, everything is so much more inclusive and diverse in the classroom, and the video examples that we use, and the teaching examples. And so it feels like there's a place at the table for everyone.
Okay. Okay. So an engineer, I worked for a little while in an engineering consulting firm, and a lot of the engineers had a real classic way of seeing the world. That the world is kind of you face problems and challenges that you can deconstruct and you can create solutions. And engineers just think in a particular way. So how would you explain to somebody who has zero interest in the either the scientific merit or in the cultural merit or the just the inherent merit of something that seems utterly fantastic. Horror films are are in many cases like, okay, there is some horror which is very close to real life, but many horror films are completely magical thinking, right? So
Right.
how do you kind of open the door to somebody who would just look at you in with confused eyes to kind of say, "Well, look again. It's more fascinating than you think."
Yeah. So I actually, we've had many readers reach out to us who were not traditional horror fans and not into scary things at all, who have come to tell us, hey, somebody recommended this book and I was skeptical, but it actually opened my eyes to this genre or these concepts. And and for some of them, it made them go out and seek out some of these movies to watch, and they were able to watch them through this lens where
Yeah,
it made it less scary for them, where they may not be a traditional horror fan.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, this that reminded me. You were talking about engineering. I taught a semester where I had an entire classroom of engineering majors, and another classroom was entirely full of fine arts majors, and then the
Mm-hmm.
rest were mixed.
Mm-hmm.
And I assumed, based on my own stereotype, well, the engineering students, it was a public speaking class. Well, they're not going to do great because they're not maybe used to public speaking, and the fine
Right.
arts students, they're going to be the best class I've ever had. And it
Uh-huh.
was actually the opposite. The engineering students, they knew that they were maybe had to overcome this hurdle, and they took it seriously. They were
Yeah.
the best class I've ever had. Whereas the fine arts students figured this is an easy A and hardly tried, and it was the worst. It was the
Oh,
worst
okay.
class I ever had. So, kind of like our books. Well, just because you assume something or you think something, it doesn't make it true. And
Right.
so you have to follow through and see what happens.
Yeah. Kelly, I love it. I love it. Now, okay, so I kind of think you hinted at it, and I'm sorry if I didn't catch on. I didn't lock onto it. You've also written fiction.
Right, and nothing published yet. But
Okay.
my best friend and I, we write screenplays together. So
Oh,
we've got some short films, some TV scripts, and some features. And we're shopping things with our agent right now, which is exciting. But so
oh,
yes, and
nice.
definitely in the horror genre.
Okay. Do you have a pandemic film in the works?
We don't. We're
Just like, who wants to talk
avoiding the
about
subject.
that?
Yeah, we wrote about it in our third book, The Science of Stephen King, because of course his
Yeah.
famous novel, The Stand, was based
Yeah.
on a pandemic.
Mm.
And that book, we were literally writing that chapter when we went into lockdown in March
Oh,
2 years
wow.
ago, and so it felt very eerie, and we didn't know sort of what would happen, but I get here we
Hmm.
are 2 years later.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Shall we move on to the fourth photo?
That'd be great.
So, is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So, if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.